Okay. If anybody who's still waiting to take their seats, please do so. I'm gonna get started. We're already running 15 minutes over, so this is great chairmanship on my behalf. But thank you very much for you guys all attending. I know we're in a lot of strict competition for events at this point in time. Thank you for also making it at the end of a long and very fruitful day. My name is Alec Taylor. I'm the head of the production policy team at WWF. So that's our work that covers agriculture, land use, international trade, and also seafood and fisheries on the marine side of things. And we're here today to discuss how can we properly finance a just and regenerative transition in farming that we I think hopefully are all agreed that we need if we are to meet our collective societal, climate and environmental goals and ultimately drive prosperous and resilient farming businesses as well. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to give a quick introduction to the roadmap that we have produced with the support of NatWest. I'm going to hand over to our esteemed panel to give 5 minutes of introductory remarks, and then I'm going to just hand it straight over to you guys for questions and discussions as we go on, so that we finish hopefully on time by 5:45. I'm going to just quickly start by saying what we probably already know is that we are very much in the midst of this transition. We're not starting from a stable place, whether that's through the impacts of climate change or whether that's through the impacts of changes in policy. And from a financial perspective, we are also in a period of flux, whether that's changes in public payment schemes, introducing nature markets for biodiversity or carbon, whether that's supply chain incentives and relationships that are being developed, whether that's through changing lending terms. All of this is an exciting but understandably confusing and potentially even contradictory space that we are operating in at the moment. And so I'm really excited that we have the chance to discuss this together and hopefully find a community and a way forward that we can actually get some proper money into the right places at the right times to help farmers even take the first steps to becoming regenerative champions. So really, ultimately, in keeping with the theme of this conference, it's around financial diversity, diversification of income, as well as other forms of diversity that come alongside that, and understanding that the resilience of the whole food system, all of the food supply chains that go along it, depend on the resilience of those farming businesses and those farmers, and that supply chain has a shared responsibility to share the risk and the cost of that transition. And hopefully some of the conclusions and recommendations of this roadmap can offer some guidance to making that happen. So today, WWF and NatWest have collectively published a roadmap for financing a regenerative transition in England. I say in England because it is a direct response to the UK government's commitment in the Green Finance Strategy last year to publish its own investment roadmap for nature-positive agriculture. We haven't really seen much update on that recently, so if anybody from government is in the room, take our document, please use it and do as you wish with it. So that's in essence why, from a policy perspective, we are England focused, but I'm sure that many of the recommendations and lessons will be applicable across the UK, not least because so much of the supply chain, so many businesses do operate across the UK. The roadmap is the product of a number of discussions that we have had both individually with organisations and collectively through workshops with farming organisations, with banks, with supply chain actors, with retailers and government organisations and departments. It is a collective effort, and I want to pay tribute to the discussions and thank everybody who took part in the process, some of whom I can see in this room today. Some of the core messages, I think, that the core themes that come out of the roadmap itself is that ultimately this is a shared action agenda. This is an all hands on deck mentality, and actually, if we are to have resilient farm businesses, it will take action by each individual actor in this food system to drive more value and reduce more risk and give more control back to those food producers from a financial perspective, whether that's through incentives or any other form of action. The second point that has come out through those discussions is that there is a real appetite and a real community to do this, whether that's driven by international disclosure reporting frameworks like the task forces for climate or nature-related disclosure, or whether that's just because ultimately this change is facing us and we have to stand headlong against it. We're also seeing, though, that landscape is very fragmented at the moment, and there's a real need to bring common standards, common rules, common metrics, and also bring communities together. It feels like we have different communities learning about each other through this process, whether it's financial communities learning about how farming works, or about farming communities learning about some of these different financial options. We have these different groups of people understanding each other at this point in time, and ultimately, hopefully, a community formed through the process of creating this roadmap. And also through all of this, although there is already a lot of good stuff happening, which we do highlight in the report, a lot of models of working between banks and suppliers, for instance, or cooperative models, or models involving data and NGOs. A lot of the actors who we talked to said it is back to the government to provide the pivotal leadership and vision to de-risk this transition into which financial institutions and other actors can then flow money in. So actually, a lot of these things are seen as, there is a risk of investing. There's also a risk of not investing. And actually, where does that balance shift? So we have a number of key recommendations for government, a number of key recommendations for banks and supply chain actors. Ultimately, it is about things like harmonized data and metrics, long-term vision and policy, proper funding and investment for regenerative outcomes, the development of private finance and nature markets in a robust way that rewards regenerative outcomes. And there's a whole bunch of great stuff that a lot of people are doing already that could be scaled up if we just brought things together a little bit more. I will stop there because I've already exceeded my 5 minutes, so I want to give enough time to the panelists to give their remarks. So I'm just going to, this is basically in the report. It shows the roadmap that is focused on government. I didn't even talk to any of these slides, but you kind of got the picture of what I was saying. I'm now going to introduce a very esteemed panel of experts that have helped us in this process to give their introductory remarks. I'm going to start with Helen Avery on my immediate right. So Helen is Director of Nature Programs at the Green Finance Institute. And GFI has also been doing some amazing work talking to banks and farmers about how we can leverage the private investment that we need into the kind of farming that we're talking about today. On Helen's right, we have Ash Gilman, Director of Agricultural Strategy at Cranswick. And again, Cranswick has been doing some really innovative blended finance models in which the supply chain incentives that Cranswick produce marry up with some of the public payment schemes that are on offer. And then on the far right or far left, your far left, Tim Hopkin, founder of the Land App, a spatial platform to help farmers and other organizations better understand and prioritize where they can get investment into their actions. So I'm going to go to each of those in turn, starting with Helen. And Helen, I really want to understand from your and GFI's perspective what the scale of interest and need is for private finance. It seems to be a lot of interest at the moment and a lot of potential money coming in. But how do we make that happen? And what lessons and recommendations can you bring to bear?
Thanks, Alex, and Happy New Year, and congratulations on the roadmap. I know it can feel like you're boiling the ocean as so many different sectors have to come together and so much needs to happen at once, and I think you've done an amazing job, so well worth a read. In terms of the scale, so and I'll speak from what we work on. A lot of it has been driven by TCFD and TNFD, as you pointed to. We host the Secretariat on the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and we run the UK National Consultation Group, which is about 600 companies across the UK who are committed to starting that journey on the TNFD. And I think that's really where the push has come from the private sector at least, so that they know they've got these disclosures coming. I think multiple people are talking about a pathway or a glide path to mandating TNFD by 2027. They know they're going to have to be reporting on the nature-related impacts and dependencies. That's going to mean looking at their supply chains. So that's definitely a driver. Of why we're seeing an increased interest from the private sector more generally, and obviously that feeds into then the finance sector. What I think most stakeholders, and maybe this seems a bit of a generalization, haven't quite got yet, is that yes, these disclosures are coming and that's why they're making moves, but I don't think they quite understand still the material risk of what could happen if we don't support nature. I think that's a big gap at the moment. So people sort of saying, yes, we'll do disclosures, but we don't really see it as a risk. And I think that shift has to happen. We've been doing some work with Bank of England and Universities of Oxford and Reading and UNET WCMC, which will come out in the second quarter, that is looking at what is the nature-related risk to the UK economy in terms of GDP, what kind of sectors are we going to be impacting, what does it mean if we've got scenarios like breadbasket failure internationally, or we've got pollution in the UK and soil health erosion, what does that mean? And I think that will start to shed a light on actually there's a material risk at play here, and that will be more of a boost, I think, to sort of garnering more interest from the private sector. The finance sector, I think, are always all over it because there's an opportunity there for them. So that if there's a way to get in there, that they will. And we hear from banks all the time, yes, we're there, we've got all the loans that we want to give out, it's just no one's coming to get them. And I think that plays into the second part, which is we don't really know, I think farmers still don't quite feel confident in knowing what they've got to do. So they don't know who they turn to pay for it, and it's not clear who's going to pay for it, but also if it's not going to be paid for, how they're going to finance it, and are the terms of that finance suitable for them. And that, I think, we still don't really know, and some of that is because we don't know what farmers, well, we know what farmers need to do, but farmers don't necessarily know what they need to do, so it's hard to put a price on what they've got to do and how much it's going to cost them, if you see what I mean. So I know that I won't linger on this, but we just produced, DEFRA asked us to produce this. We really work with the finance sector, but through some work we did last year, and some of it with yourselves, we ended up speaking a lot to farmers and developing this farming toolkit, which is specifically for farmers, which is supposed to help them think through what are nature markets, because many of them don't know that TNFD even exists. They couldn't even tell you what it stands for, and why should they? It's not in their world, but it is going to impact them, so they will need to know. So we have this introduction to nature markets, which is supposed to be very easy for farmers to digest, and then we actually take them on a journey of how will you work with other farmers if you want to access nature markets? And I should have caveated this by saying nature markets are obviously one tool for accessing private sector finance. They're not the tool. Supply chain will pay, banks will make loans, but nature markets like biodiversity net gain and voluntary carbon and nutrient markets are obviously growing. The more compliance markets we can have, the better. At the moment, obviously carbon's voluntary market. But we take them through the journey of really, how do you assess your land opportunity? How would you work with other farmers? 'Cause it's really important in aggregating, coming together. How do you approach other buyers? And we take them all the way through, knowing that this is not going to happen for most farmers for at least a couple of years. But the idea is that we're not advising them, we're just saying have a read, there's things to sort of understand and considerations. There are case studies of your other companies other farmers, who've done this work. And what we've got out of this is that really what we're saying to farmers is safe bet, baseline. And I think there's a discussion to be had around who's paying for that baseline. So I'll stop there because I know we want to get to questions and get to my colleagues on the panel. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Helen. Moving quickly on to Ash and Cranswick, you've been doing some good work at Cranswick, working across this blended finance space. So I just wonder if you could quickly set out what you've been doing, and I suppose what the opportunity is from your perspective to scale that up, I suppose, to make sure that it even goes beyond Cranswick to some of the other supply chains that you might be interested in.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Seeing that picture of me, you never know where people get a picture from you these days. And I just finished Norfolk Superhero and feeling exhausted, and probably feeling reasonably exhausted after today, actually. There's been a lot to take on. I think for those of you that don't know Cranswick very, very briefly, we were started by a bunch of Yorkshire farmers that were actually looking to diversify back in 1974 because they felt the financial pressure from income from pigs was too great. Diversified into feed. The rest is history, I suppose. But you know, we like to think of ourselves as a premium food producer focusing on pigs and poultry. And we've got, you know, reasonable market share now in the UK. And yes, we are a PLC, but the heart is in the right place. We've got some pretty big challenges ahead of us in terms of emissions and so forth. I'm pushing the business. I have an aspiration that we are going to reduce our carbon emissions dramatically by 2030. And we've got a number of initiatives in place, and those are being rolled out in a practical way, particularly across our pig supply chain as it stands at the moment. You know, we've forecasted, based on historical data, what our technical improvement will deliver over the next 6 years. We're actively reducing soya within the diets, which is a key driver to the carbon footprint. And we're now rolling out low carbon finisher rations across our pig business, and collecting all the data with that. And I think trying to get to the point now is we've got a clear roadmap based on carbon footprinting that we've been doing since 2017. We've developed a carbon calculator with another, and we've got a clear roadmap to reduce carbon. And in order to get to net zero, I know that's a debated word at the moment as well, but actually there's around 20% that we need to, if you like, remove from our pig supply chain. And this is what we've been working on in terms of this model, is our own carbon inset scheme within our aligned farms within our business. And it's come about through a journey over the last 6 years of collecting data, using the latest technology to collect even better data. And you know, soil testing since 2017. We've been working with WWF since then, with Tesco and Coca-Cola around soil and water stewardship through the Norfolk Rivers Trust. And we've gleaned so much information from that. And the carbon inset scheme is a product of all of that work, basically, because we've got a really good understanding now of the positive impacts of outdoor pigs, muck, manure, going back into soils. Everyone knows the benefits of that, improving soil water capacity, holding capacity, etc. But a big part of it is being able to sequester carbon back into the soils and use that as, if you like, a bit of a negative number against our carbon footprint. So the network of farms that we hold are around 400 independent farmers that are contract rearing and finishing pigs for us. They're obviously landowners in their own right. We pay them an annual fee for that delivery of a service, if you like. But actually, our view was a couple of years ago, actually, we could deliver them an additional income stream if they start sequestering carbon through a change in land use. And that's effectively what we've done. And what we've developed is a model that tops up the the sustainable farming incentive, the countryside stewardship scheme. So it's effectively a premium on top of that base rate to make it more attractive for those independent producers to get into that scheme. And we can capture the carbon uplift, if you like. So I guess the key part for us is having an aligned supply chain that runs all the way through in us to be able to capture that piece. And we've worked really hard over the last couple of years in terms of aligning producers and so forth with individual customers as such in order to be able to do that. So yes, that's where we're going. It's about private, if you like, money being topped up on top of government money to hopefully create a win-win for all, because ultimately we see declining farm supports, and actually that puts at risk, if you like, the British pig supply chain. And so by generating an additional income for those producers, hopefully it will help to support them and make them more resilient.
Thank you, Tim. And sorry, Ash. And Tim, last but not least, data and metrics always comes up as something that's not just stopping the flow of large volumes of investment into farming, but also something that farmers themselves are feeling under the burden of collecting and often maybe not fairly getting rewarded for by other actors. Could you maybe speak to your experience through LandApp maybe, and just some of the solutions in terms of how we better spatialize and target data so that farmers actually get more control in terms of being able to use their assets and get money in order to protect nature and build those businesses?
Great, thank you, Alec, and thank you for having me here. Yeah, this is obviously a fascinating topic, and just to give a bit of context on sort of the journey that I've been on. So I'm from a 90-acre family farm. I think the probability was 100% we were going to have to sell the farm, and so when I was about 16 or 17, had a conversation with my granddad, and he basically said, give up the idea of managing a farm because there's no money in it. And of course, logically, that makes sense, right? Everyone can see the cash and say, okay, well, this probably isn't a route to, somewhere positive. But of course, emotionally, that doesn't make sense. For those that manage farms, farms, of course, they are an asset, but they're slightly more than that, especially multi-generational. So back then, I sort of decided to dedicate myself to working out how to solve this slightly ridiculous problem. I was lucky enough to travel around the world a few times and saw that this problem wasn't just uniquely here. We've done quite a good job undermining natural capital globally, and of course, the trajectory of that isn't great when scaled up and expanded over time. So I ended up studying regenerative agriculture about 12 years ago with Darren Doherty, Joel Salatin, Kurt Gadzia. And it became very obvious that actually Regen Ag, as its core philosophy, is a design methodology. It's how do you look at the natural assets, the context of those, climate, etc., and then design according to the context to design, great outcomes. So how do you put trees in the right place, wetlands in the right place, fences in the right place, buildings in the right place? And I just couldn't understand why there wasn't a tool that kind of synthesized something like SimCity, Google Earth, and Google Docs, and just made a tool for farmers that helped them design the right thing in the right place. I was under the assumption someone would be doing that somewhere, so I kind of hung around for a while, waited and kept an eye out. And essentially, of course, I couldn't find a tool that I could use for the farm. So that was really where LandApp came from as a concept. How do you create a tool that empowers land managers en masse to design effectively for their context and ideally derive a fair income or revenue for the assets and services that or the services from the assets that they have. So yeah, that was the core of the starting point. And not from a business or tech background, it obviously took me on quite an interesting journey. So everything I've learned has only been from speaking to a lot of people in this room and you guys. And what's become clear over time is this idea of systematically designing land is an imperative component of a resilient future. So we need to be making data-driven decisions as a sector. Agriculture is probably the last sector to transition from analog, which is a shame because there are such a lot of negative externalities from bad farming. But the transition is well underway. So I guess the way that we're seeing it, and we're lucky enough not only to work with around 10 million hectares of England farmland, so 10 million hectares has been mapped on the software. We also work with the land agents, so we work with Savills, and we have done for the last few years, and many others like them. So we understand their problems and issues, and we ideally work to solve them. But we've also just started the second-year contract with Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer's. We've just finished delivering UCO, England Woodland Creation Offer, into LandApp with Forestry Commission. We're working with United Utilities on funding farmers in the Irwell catchment to mitigate phosphate. And we work very closely with DEFRA on sort of this big transition. And so what's become very clear through all those conversations is the nub of the problem is how do you elevate the resilience of holdings? And so you have two components in that, one of which the farmer, as Helen was saying, and Ash was saying as well, is we need landowners to very quickly get a digital twin of their holding. So what exactly do they have, and what are the implications of that? What's the resilience profile of the digital twin? So one thing that I've been advocating for a while, and with you guys as well, is we're lucky enough in Britain to have Ordnance Survey. So Britain's National Mapping Agency, as you guys all know, they hold the best quality spatial data funded by taxpayers that is a premium product for farmers to access. So we have all these land managers throughout the UK trying to make smart decisions, and they're not able to access the data that's needed to help them make those smart decisions. So one thing we're really pushing for is how do you make sure that people can get access to high quality baselines from which they can derive insight. The second piece which we're pushing for, or having conversations with at least, is how do we make sure that when farmers are trying to work out what to do where, there's spatial prioritization. You know, trees will go better in some places than others on a farm, wetlands better in some places than others, pollinator mixes, whatever. There are rules that determine where things should go. Think solar panels, right? You wouldn't put them on a north-facing slope. And for farmers to make good decisions, they need to see, okay, what's my context, what's my baseline, where will I get funded to do what, where? So this could be like England Woodland Creation Offer, spatially targeted, or it could be United Utilities wanting to fund farmers in the Irwell. Cool, if I'm a farmer in the Irwell, can I be notified exactly where I'll get funded to put what where? So second component is you've got the market suggestions in one place aligned to the context of your holding, from which you can design, okay, cool, based on those market incentives and those price points, I will do these interventions in these locations. So you design a future state, and then you can see, well, I'm moving from my resilient position, I am this resilient in my current baseline, that future design, I will be more resilient, and then that information can flow to the likes of the food retailers, the banks, etc. So you can elevate, you can demonstrably elevate your resilience in a way that can be understood by the corporates or the data consumers of that. So we see that we have to work to the selfish motivations of each individual player. We can't rely on philanthropy to create resilience. Farmers will design the right thing in the right place if they're going to make profit. So simple, spatial prioritization and budget. Food retailers desperately want supply chain continuity. They want a more resilient supply chain, so they will incentivize that. So the boards of the likes of Sainsbury's, one of the things they do care about is, are they going to have lettuces, cabbages, milk on their shelves next year? That's dependent on the resilience of the farm. And then the likes of the water companies, they don't want to keep spending money on taking agri-chemicals out of the water, so they have budget that they make available for farmers. And then, of course, as a nation, we have national targets that we have to hit, 30 by 30, net zero. And so everyone is motivated, the whole of the land economy is motivated to elevate the state of resilience. And I guess the approach that we're coming from is how can we reduce the administrative burden for each of those stakeholders to interface in one exchange and collectively move us towards elevating the resilience of the natural capital. So I guess, philosophically, this is why we're so optimistic, because actually when you look at the selfish motivations of each stakeholder, everyone values resilience, and therefore if we can just make that a simple transition, then the chances are higher that we will have a great outcome. So we don't need to rely on goodwill, we don't need to rely on philanthropy, we don't need to rely on farmers knowing their neighbours. If we can put the system together right, resilience is an inevitable outcome. And I guess that's what we're focusing on as a company, is how do we make it simple and easy for everyone to make this transition to resilience.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to all three of you guys for giving such eloquent presentations. I'm now going to hand it straight out to the floor. There is a roving mic around, so if you have a question, do please introduce yourselves. I'll start with the lady at the back and then go to the lady there.
Hi, my name's Marion Bruce. I am a farmer, but I also work for Trees for Life, so I have an ecological background and take an ecological approach to everything. Could I just ask everybody on the panel, but maybe particularly Tim, you just talked about the land holding being the most important unit and that farmers didn't need to know their neighbours. Actually, if you take an ecological approach, you need to take a biological and bioregional approach, which understands how different land holdings are within a whole bioregion, within a catchment, that underpins all of the ecology, all of the water, all the hydrology that allows us to grow anything on any piece of soil. And could I suggest that actually that's really difficult to do, which is why historically we've not done it. but actually that seems to be at the root of how we create resilient landscapes. And I would just ask, how do you envisage that happening?
Yes, it's a very, very good and important question. So, yeah, the functionality of the ecosystem is what matters, so the blend of flora and fauna, because that's what creates resilience. And also, the more of a functional blend you have, the greater the disturbance in the ecosystem, and therefore more, biomass will essentially be produced, without going into detail. But anyway, the point is, yes, you do want a functional ecosystem, and therefore you need a connected ecosystem as well, so you've got to remove the fragmentation. I guess the point, which is really hard to do without visuals, which I always find when I'm talking about the software, is as long as every farmer can know what they have and they can see from a data perspective where woodland should go, wetland should go, etc., and they can see the payment rate, it means that the farmer is empowered to say, okay, actually, do you know what, that woodland would be great there, and actually it's quite profitable, so I'll definitely do it. At the moment, a lot of, like we're doing a higher tier countryside stewardship on the farm, you've got to be quite philanthropically oriented and have a high resilience to pain to bother to go into higher tier countryside stewardship, which not many people have, right? So what we're trying to do is say, actually, oh my God, that thing is really profitable. It's actually worth the hassle factor of getting into the scheme because therefore it's more likely to be undertaken. So, okay, I can see woodland should go there. I'm going to make profit. Cool, I'll do woodland there. I'll do wetland there. I'll do some pollinator mixes here. But those are data rules, so the next door neighbour would see the same sort of thing. Woodland should go there, wetland should go there, pollinator mixture should go there, etc. And the point is, I guess that I'm trying to say is that for ecological restoration to be inevitable, you can't rely on the farmers knowing each other or getting along or having to meet in a pub to discuss stuff. They've got to see what they have, see what the market will pay them to do in a profitable way, because then they will, like any actor, they will actually do those things. They will get paid to deliver those schemes. But the next door neighbour will do exactly the same, and the next door neighbour will do the same, and the next one will, and the next one will, and the next one will. And by everyone responding to market incentives and putting the right thing in the right place, you create this connected ecology, which is what creates the functionality of the ecosystem, which is essentially what we're driving towards. So you're absolutely right. We cannot have fragmented activity, which can happen with countryside stewardship, right? You could do good things, but your neighbour won't. What we need is a market that incentivizes everyone to do the right thing in the right place, because it's the best way to ensure, because you can't force anyone to do anything, it's the best way to ensure that everyone responds to market price and puts the right thing in the right place, and we do restore mass-scale ecological functionality at a national or global level. So basically, what I'm saying is we don't want to be dependent on everyone knowing each other and being friends for ecological restoration to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, happy to. I think from my perspective, we, from a breeding unit perspective, outdoor breeding unit perspective, we are in the cycle of short-term tenancies. We're also in an area, if you sort of focus in on East Anglia, but I know it's happening elsewhere, where sort of the business of land ownership is becoming increasingly separated from the business of farming. And I think that there lies a massive challenge. And I think, when I think to some of the rotations that an outdoor breeding unit sits within, you can be sharing it with up to maybe 3 other farming companies as such, whether it's energy or food. And that was something that we're brutally aware of, and we've put together a supply chain pilot feeding into DEFRA on, if you like, the positive impact of outdoor pigs and how you can do it better and deliver benefits back. But I come back to the work that we started with the Norfolk Rivers Trust in 2017. That just opened our eyes to, we're just a small little farming business within a huge catchment, and actually you need to bring everyone on the journey with you, and actually being a farmer as such and not a landowner with a huge amount of muck to back into the soil gives you actually quite a big voice now, and that's a voice that I am using just to influence the landowners, the land agents, to have a longer term view, because if you've got short term tenancies and you want resilience, you got to work together, otherwise you're not going to get it.
Yeah, I'll just add briefly. I'm sort of a bit more on the I think all farmers should work together. Not being a farmer, I can say that, obviously, although having met many farmers, I know that's not always the case. Because, to your point, Marion, that we do have to deliver a landscape scale for nature, and that's not the case with climate necessarily, especially on carbon. You can do it individually. So I know we pushed for it last year, and Tim, you were in that group, so I know you pushed for it too, that there would be a pot of funding from government to help farmers come together, because it actually costs quite a lot of money to develop an aggregation model and bring your neighbours together on that journey. Sometimes about $250,000 just to get it going. So we pushed for a fund, and that's now just been launched. That's the Investment Readiness Fund Round 3, to which we developed that toolkit to help farmers in that process to really understand what that means. What I would say, though, is that we haven't really bottomed out what do these aggregation models look like, because I think the goal is individually farmers will be able to have exactly what you say, Tim, but it feels like we're on a bit of a journey where actually it's better if people come together. And with local nature recovery strategies, it feels like how are we not all going to come together? Like I feel like the future is one of working more collaboratively and in community, and place-based financing is obviously something we're all thinking about as well. But the rules of the game aren't really in place for aggregation models, and we do need to set some best practices for those. Like what are the rules of the game? What is the fees to get in, and who gets what? I always talk about Environmental Farmers Group as a really interesting model of a cooperative where individually you can benefit, because if it happens on your land that you make a trade, and again this is just a nature market trade, you get the majority of it, but it's also shared with the other farmers so that you're creating that landscape scale and you're all on the same journey and bought into the same vision. But those rules need to be set out still, so I'm hoping this year that we'll start to see that.
I don't mean to be cynical in what I was saying, by the way, because the other thing we do in LandApp is we work with about 50 facilitators, and we're on 5 different landscape recoveries. So in LandApp, a facilitator can aggregate all of the farmers within their group into a single view. So you can see the aggregated baseline across the whole region and the land management plan prior to going into funding. So Environmental Farmers Group use LandApp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not being cynical, because we do believe in that the social capital is imperative for it. Our farmers in a farming cluster, but I have seen how they break down and how they can be very inefficient, and therefore we can't be dependent entirely on them for nature recovery, but they are a good thing when done right. But yeah.
Lovely, thank you guys. Well, we had a question at the front from the lady, and also, okay, a few more questions, so.
Hi, Susan Arndt, Independent Project Manager, which is by way of saying I'm going to ask a stupid question. Possibly an obvious one. Could you explain what the new roadmap is, what it tells us we should do, and how you're going to make it happen?
Okay. So the roadmap is effectively a timeline and set of recommendations that sets out, particularly for the government, what steps and it needs to take in core areas, whether that's in data, markets, policy, or investment, or regulation, in order to de-risk and leverage private finance into the right kind of regenerative outcomes. So in that roadmap, there are a set of recommendations. There's also a set of actions that each actor within that supply chain either is already taking or should be taking in order to build on the policy and framework that the government put in place. So essentially, it's not saying we're starting from scratch here. It's saying that the financial need is massive. Farmers are in a confusing space in this agenda, and we need a community and a vision, if you like, particularly from government, to put the regulations and the guardrails and the incentives in place to drive that forward. In terms of how that's going to happen, there are policy recommendations in there. There are recommendations for different actors. There's already good stuff happening. So do have a look at the report. It is report. Yeah, it was just released this morning. If you go to the link at the bottom of the slide, you should be able to find it. It's on our WWF reports site. I hope that answers your question. I'll go to some other questions first. Lady over there, and then gentleman in the front row.
Thank you. Anna Lehman with BikeLife Works. I have 2 questions. Hopefully they'll be quick to answer. The TNFD and the TCFD, I'd be interested in your view in terms of how they can also start stimulating or start regulating demand. I think a huge problem that we actually have is that, especially on the biodiversity side, there is taxonomy isn't clear on what kind of biodiversity units are we actually buying or not, or for what, and there's basically just no demand out there. How can that be driven forwards? Could that be a way forward? And then just curious on the baseline development process and question that you raised there yourself, Helen. Any experience in terms of economies of scale, grouping landscape actors, or farm-based tools, anything that's available, or funding for that? Very grateful for any hints. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be brief. And I'm going to try and learn to use the mic this year without eating it. This is what I usually do for some reason. Sorry about that. Just so I've understood you, are you saying demand for biodiversity credits and how they play a role into that? So I didn't quite. I was having trouble hearing you.
Apologies. Mostly around regulating demand, I suppose, or driving demand. Because we don't really see clear demand signals from sort of buyers on biodiversity units, or who would pay for that environmental outcome at the end of the day. Is there a way for the TNFD to encourage regulators to I don't know, set goals around that, or any other way to drive demand?
Right, I think I understand. So you're saying in terms of getting the buyers to pay for the changes through the supply chain. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. One would think they will have to. My concern, and I'm just being really honest here, is that there is a very big incentive for the supply chain to pay now because they've got these disclosures coming. So you'll see that they're looking at helping farmers baseline, or they will be, hopefully, and looking to inset or buy their credits. They're exploring all of that. The concern is that 3 years down the line, it's just business as usual, and therefore farmers have just got to do it. And I don't think we talk about that enough. It's not a popular thing to say on a panel. I've said it several times, and I normally get some kickback on it. But that is my concern at the moment, that we're not really addressing exactly your point, like how are we going to get people to pay? So I'm not really answering your question. I think it will make a difference, possibly in the short term, probably not in the long term. Then we can lead into a conversation on biodiversity credits, which we probably don't want to go there today. But yeah, so I'll hand over to. Shall I hand over to?
I'm going to take 2 more questions first, and then we'll come to an end. I'm going to take gentleman at the front, and then the lady in the pink top. Thank you.
And been very interesting today hearing a lot of people mentioning the challenge of whether there needs to be a definition of regenerative or not. And I heard on the panel a very broad definition, really, which is great because it gives you lots of leeway to really allow a discussion around farming changing from what it's been incentivized to do for the last 50 years or 70 years and starting to do something different. The issue with that, of course, is that if you have a arable farmer in southern Lincolnshire who claims to be regenerative, you have no idea what that really means. So I'd be interested in comments on that. But the corollary of that is, notwithstanding that there's a issue with definitions, is just what do you think the barriers are to undertaking that transition at a farm level? What are the barriers, and what role do you think that finance plays in that as a barrier? Is it a barrier?
I can say Ash may be better at being specific. One thing we're seeing, which maybe links slightly to TNFD, is corporates who are going to incentivize their suppliers to transition. They don't have the wherewithal to look at the maps of every farm in their supply chain. What they've said to us is they want an equivalent of an environmental performance certificate for the farm. What's the resilience score of the farm today and in the future? Because they can aggregate that data, they can understand their portfolio, and they can also benchmark everyone across everyone, so they can equally look at the resilience of farmers in southern Spain, or palm oil in Indonesia, or whatever, farmers in England. So it may simplify it too much, but things like an EPC do move markets in a good way. And I think regenerative agriculture, because it means so many different things to so many different people, although there is a design framework behind it, which isn't spoken about enough, I think the way the market will move is through this kind of this EPC equivalent, because it will be a lever that can allow corporates to understand, benchmark their suppliers, but also can incentivize them to move up. So as long as the farmer can see their resilience profile, design a future state and see their resilience profile move up, which will mostly come through regenerative agriculture techniques, then that's how the market's going to move. I can't see any other way that the market will genuinely move at scale in an incentivized way without that sort of methodology.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we're doing a huge amount of modelling around, the carbon footprint of a pig, of a chicken. We've got a great understanding of the impact of feed on that, and I mentioned soya, but actually, if you look at wheat, that has probably an equal contribution to the carbon footprint. And we're buying hundreds of thousands of tons from UK farmers. And I see that as a massive opportunity for Cranswick to go out and give a market signal and say, actually, we want a lower carbon wheat. Because actually the value of that is quite considerable to us in terms of reducing that carbon footprint and the commitments around science-based targets and all the rest of it. I guess one of the challenges is I'm not sure we've quite got the traceability within our cereal market to pass that through to a compounder or one of our own mills even. And I think that bit needs to be done first. I mean, we've talked about a digital grain passport since 2009, and I'm not sure we're that much closer now. So it's about passing the provenance through. We could have a fantastic farm down in Sussex. We go and visit it, but if they can't pass that provenance through the supply chain and get it into our mill, then I struggle in paying an additional value for it. But, we can create the market signal. It's then about collecting the data right, so then we can capture the value, if you like.
No, I had it. I'm sorry. I took the mic. And just really quickly, I was just going to say, the taxonomy may help. I don't. So the taxonomy has been developed in the UK at the moment. It's got obviously there's more taxonomies than just the UK's, but it's looking specifically at farming. But again, it's sustainable farming. And Tim will know more about this as me, as I think you've fed into some of it, Tim. So potentially that may help in some of those definitions. They're going to be broad, but I think it's a question to actually watch. Is when we say sustainable farming and regenerative farming, how can we make sure that's all included in the taxonomy?
Lovely, yeah, very good point about how we drive actual change that we want to see through these processes and frameworks. Lady, you've been waiting very patiently. Last question quickly, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Hi, Anne Conquest from LUC. It's a question for Ash predominantly. We've just published some research from Scottish Agriculture about climate change and the private sector drivers for climate change in agriculture. And the comment with that was that there was too many carbon calculators in the market, depending on who people were supplying. You've now said that you've developed your own carbon calculator. So just wondering about the admin burden on suppliers, your supply chain. Who can work? Why did you decide to develop a new carbon calculator in the first place? And also, what can we do to try and reduce that admin burden by people like yourselves working together with the rest of the supply chain to make sure that admin burden is reduced first for your supply chain?
Yeah, I guess just to be clear, we kind of supported another company in the development of a more precise pig calculator. Why did we do it back in 2017? I sort of come from a background that I guess was understanding potentially what future asks were going to be from customer base and so forth. So we set off on that journey. The whole piece around, there's several carbon calculators I'm kind of bored of really, and sort of, as long as you're making an effort to capture the carbon footprint, and you start to understand what makes up a carbon footprint, then you'll naturally, hopefully, hone your skills and understanding so that you know exactly where you are. But, obviously, DEFRA are looking to develop something. I'm not sitting around waiting for that. We'll just get on and do it. I'm sure there'll be others that would say the carbon calculator might be inaccurate, or there are better ones out there. Well, fine. I'm not going to jump from lily pad to lily pad. We've got one. We tweak it. We are very, very strong in our feedback into the company that's developed it with us. So we're constantly tweaking it. You know, it's never going to be perfect, but I'm confident in the benchmarking that we do that we're about right. And, you know, the feed bit is absolutely key, and you can get into a whole load of detail around that without necessarily having a whole carbon footprint. And, you know, getting nutritionalists involved and all of that is all part and parcel of it, and it's just evolving the whole time. But I don't think, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying this, I don't think sitting there saying, well, there isn't a perfect carbon calculator is an excuse for not getting on with it. We know we've got to do something, and we know we've got to change, so let's crack on.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to ask one very quick question to the panelists in one sentence. We haven't touched very much on policy as part of this discussion, but I want to know what would be your one thing from government that you want to see that would leverage the finance that we need. And then I'll just close up very quickly. So, I don't know, Helen, do you want to start?
I think it's these priority outcome metrics. Just be very clear what we want from outcomes and the vision, what we want from farmers, and then everything will kind of fall into place. But just being very, very clear on that.
I think there'll be many that are aware of the supply chain review and fairness in the supply chain and so forth. And yeah, we've fed back into that. But I think there will be an outcome out of that following the government review. I think for me, the priority is that contracts have to be long-term. You know, yes, a sensible notice period, but we have to have long-term contracts. We can't hit these science-based targets at the last weekend in 2029. We got to be working up towards it now, and having long-term contracts is a key part of that.
Yeah, I think for me it's a consistent data language, so that the understanding of the baseline, the market incentives, and the future design are all in the same language, so that the public and private sector can co-invest in nature outcomes in a consistent and harmonised way. So I think that would be mine.
And our smart synapse.
Thank you. And I guess from WWF's point of view, I think we'd all like to see a bit more government joined up policy in relation to things like finance, climate, nature, health, and actually get the government to hold itself to account in legally binding terms for how do we make the best use of land, and whether that's on farm or off farm, in a joined up way that places farming and regenerative farming at the heart of these decisions that we want to take. So yeah, bring it on. Thank you very much, guys, for holding fire with us. Thank you to the panel. It's quite hot in here, so we'll get some fresh air. Enjoy your evening. Thank you very much indeed.